My mother-in-law, Alice Johnson, had arrived. A woman of strong character, but undeniably stunning. Her beauty could conquer anyone. She had a magnetic energy that drew people in, and it was impossible not to notice her confidence and charm. I remember when my wife and I visited Alice, she often dressed very provocatively. Her outfits were always chosen to emphasize her elegance and attractiveness. It didn't embarrass her in the slightest, and frankly, I found it quite fascinating. In those days, I just watched her boldness, trying not to betray my admiration, because you never knew if it wasn't some sort of loyalty test. Or maybe Alice, recently divorced, was just craving attention, trying to regain a lost part of herself. Whatever the case, Alice knew how to command the space around her. She had a disarming laugh and a piercing gaze that made you feel like you were the center of her world. When my wife went on a business trip, Alice decided to stay with me. She was originally supposed to arrive the next day, but to my surprise, the phone rang sooner than I expected. "Hello, my favorite son-in-law," she greeted cheerfully, her tone full of playful warmth. "Hello, Alice. Have you arrived yet?" "When?" I asked, slightly taken aback. "I just got off the train," she replied. "I even stopped by the restaurant to grab a bite to eat. So, son-in-law, why don't you join me? We'll sit for a while before we head home." I agreed. Where else could I go? I quickly packed up and headed out to meet her. When I arrived at the restaurant, she was sitting confidently in a corner booth, her hair cascading over her shoulders and her lips painted a deep, alluring red. Her face lit up as soon as she saw me, and her eyes sparkled with a mischievous glint. We hugged warmly and kissed on the cheek, then sat down to talk. She had the ability to turn every conversation into an adventure, and before I knew it, an hour had passed. We decided to grab a couple bottles of wine and head home. Her bags were loaded into my car, and we drove back. As soon as we arrived, Alice went straight to the shower. I took the opportunity to change into something more comfortable and called my wife to let her know I had picked up her mom. My wife seemed relieved, her voice full of gratitude, though she was unaware of the dynamics that had unfolded in her absence. When I entered the kitchen, Alice was there, already dressed in her robe and setting the table with the casual grace that seemed to be second nature to her. "Come in and sit down, son-in-law. I'll serve you now," she said with a smile that seemed both inviting and slightly mischievous. Her words were warm and soothing, like a soft hug, so I quickly sat down. Alice poured our drinks and offered a toast, her voice filled with playful enthusiasm. One glass was followed by another, and soon the air between us became lighter, the boundaries blurring. Suddenly she disappeared for a moment, only to reappear a few minutes later, dressed in boots, a short leather skirt, and a blouse that emphasized her figure in a way that was impossible not to notice. Her boldness took me by surprise, but I couldn't help but admire her confidence and courage. She walked over and, to my amazement, sat right on my lap. Lifting her leg, she showed off her boots with a playful grin. "Aren't they beautiful?" she asked, her voice teasing. "They're amazing," I replied, genuinely smitten. Her proximity made my pulse quicken and her perfume filled the space between us. "And how do they look on such beautiful legs?" she teased with a raised eyebrow, her lips curling into an understanding smile. "They're perfect," I said, my voice barely even. My mood soared, and I couldn't deny how tempting she looked. Alice smiled and leaned closer, pouring us more cognac as if she could sense the effect it was having on me. "Tell me, do I look fat?" she asked suddenly, sitting down on a stool and crossing her legs elegantly. "Not at all. Who told you that?" I replied, genuinely perplexed by the question. I couldn't escape the thought that I should do a thorough examination to give her an accurate answer. She laughed, her cheeks slightly flushed from the alcohol. We drank some more, the atmosphere becoming increasingly tense. Before I knew it, she was leaning over to give me a hug. Then, exactly what you're thinking of, my listeners, happened. Instincts took over and I pulled her into the room, onto the couch. There our game of poker went on for a very long time, until I was very tired. For the next 2 weeks we indulged in something that seemed both exhilarating and forbidden. Every moment with her was filled with an intensity I had never experienced before. We talked, laughed, and shared secrets that deepened the bond between us. From then on, Alice began to visit us more often, which I secretly looked forward to. Her presence brought a spark into my life, and it was clear that our connection had evolved into something more intimate and meaningful. Each visit was like a new chapter in a story only the two of us could understand, and I couldn't shake the sense of anticipation every time she called or walked through the door.